In this lesson, you will learn how to use the distance and midpoint formulas. So the formulas are listed above, and we'll start with the first 5 problems using the distance formula, and then the last 6 using the midpoint formula. So in both formulas, you'll notice these little 2's and 1's. These are called subscripts. So we have x sub 2, x sub 1 in the distance formula, y sub 2 and y sub 1. And then in the midpoint, we have the same thing, x sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 1, y sub 2. And then at the beginning of the midpoint formula, we have x sub m and y sub m. So the 1's and 2's just represent the first and second points. So in number 1, where we have the points 1, 4 and negative 3, 7, the 1 is x and the 4 is y, but since this is our first point, it's x sub 1, y sub 1. Same with negative 3, 7. It's x and y, but since it's our second point, it's x sub 2, y sub 2. In the midpoint formula, these m's just represent midpoint. So x sub m just means it's the x coordinate of the midpoint, and y sub m just means it's the y coordinate of the midpoint. So to finish number 1, we want to find the distance between the 2 points, so we're going to use the distance formula, and I start by substituting in the values into the proper place in the formula. X sub 2 is negative 3, and then the formula says minus x sub 1 is 1, close parentheses squared, and then plus parentheses, y sub 2 is 7, minus y sub 1 is 4, and then close parentheses squared. So starting with the parentheses, negative 3 minus negative 1 is negative 4. Make sure you keep that number inside parentheses. 7 minus 4 is 3. And then when we square each number, we get 16 plus 9. And 16 plus 9 is 25. And we know that 25 is a perfect square. It breaks up to 5 and 5. So the distance between the 2 points is 5. So same directions for number 2. We have the point negative 2, 1, which is our x1, y1, and then 7, negative 6 is our x2, y2, and I'll first write the formula. And x2 minus x1 is 7 minus x1 is negative, so I have to include another minus symbol, and then plus y2 minus y1 is negative 6 minus 1, and then squared. After the numbers are plugged in, now I simplify the parentheses. 7 minus negative 2 is 9. Negative 6 minus 1 is negative 7. And then when I square both of the numbers, I have 81 plus 49. And 81 plus 49 is 130. So to simplify the square root, if I take 130 and write the prime factorization, I have 2 times 65, and then 65 breaks up to 5 and 13. All of these numbers are prime, and since I don't have any pairs of numbers, see, square root of 130, in order to simplify this, you need to have a pair of numbers. 2 times 5 times 13 there are no pairs. So therefore, this doesn't simplify, and my final answer is the square root of 130. For number 3, we have 2.5 comma 4 as our first point, so that's our x1, y1, and then 4, 6 is our x2, y2, and I'll write the formula again. And we substitute the numbers in, and x2 minus x1 is 4 minus 2.5, and then we'll square this, plus y2 minus y1 is 6 minus 4, and then we simplify the parentheses. 4 minus 2.5 is 1.5, so 1.5, and then 6 minus 4 is 2, so if I take 1.5 squared, 1.5 times 1.5 is 2.25, so that when I add 2.25 to 4, I get 6.25. So on the side, if I take 6.25 and split this up, I still want to write my prime number on the left. 5 times 1.25 is 6.25, and then 5 times 0.25 is 1.25, and then for 0.25, this is 0.5 times 0.5, so when I take the square root of 6.25 and write it as 5 times 5 times 0.5 times 0.5, I have a pair of 5s and a pair of 0.5s, so I take out a 5 and a 0.5, multiply them together to get 2.5. So you have to go through this process if you're not allowed to use a calculator. So to write your final answer, it's 2.5. The next example shows a graph, and we want to find the length of AB. And the length of AB is this distance right here, and point A is 2, 8. I'm moving over right 2 and then up 8 units. And point B, I'm moving left 6 and down 4. So -6, -4. So if I take my point 2, 8 and label it as x1, y1, and -6, -4, I'll label as x2, y2, and then I write my formula. Writing the formula each time will help you memorize it. So x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared and I have -6 minus 2 squared plus y2 is -4 minus 8 squared. Simplify the parentheses. -6 minus 2 is -8. -4 minus 8 is -12. So that I have 64 plus 144 is 208. So if I take 208 and write the prime factorization, and I keep breaking up the number on the right until all the numbers are prime, and I have 4 2's and 1 13. So I'll rewrite 208 as its prime factorization, and I have 2 pairs of 2's, so I take out 2 2's, one to represent each pair, but the 13 stays inside, so that my final answer in simplified radical form is 4 times the square root of 13. For number 5, we want to find the distance between the ice rink and the library. Round your answer to the nearest integer. So the ice rink is 5, 5, the library is 15, 20. It doesn't matter which point you choose as your x1, y1, the answer will come out the same. So I'll just make the library 15, 20 my x1, y1, and the ice rink x2, y2. And again, I write my formula. And I have 5 minus 15 squared plus 5 minus 20 squared. Let's extend that square root symbol. And if we take 5 minus 15, that's negative 10. And then 5 minus 20 is negative 15. And negative 10 squared is 100. Negative 15 squared is 225. Add them together, and we get the square root of 325. Now for this problem, I don't have to simplify the radical because the directions say to round to the nearest integer. So in my calculator, I'm going to take the square root of 325, and the decimal that I see is 18.0278. Rounded to the nearest integer, I have a 0 in the tenths place, so it's just 18. For the rest of the problems, we'll be looking at the midpoint formula. And the directions are to find the midpoint of the segment with the given endpoints. So for the rest of the problems, we'll be looking at how to find the midpoint of the segment with the given endpoints. So for number 6, we have the 2 points, negative 2, 7, and 8, negative 9. So first let's go to the graph. And negative 2, 7 means to move left 2 points and down 7. That's right here. And we'll label this point A. And then 8, negative 9, we'll label B. So that means right 8, down negative 9 is right about here. And if we were to find the midpoint, the midpoint, it looks like, would be right around this area. So if I were to count the number of boxes going this way, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the number of boxes going this way, I have 2. So I have 2 vertically and 10 horizontally. If I take both of those values and divide them by 2, I would have 5 and 1. So from A, if I move over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then down 1, this will be my midpoint, which appears to be the point 3, negative 8. So we're going to go through the midpoint formula to show how you can get the point 3, negative 8 in case you don't have a graph to count spaces. So the midpoint formula is x sub m y sub m equals x sub 1 plus x sub 2 over 2, and then y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. And the midpoint is x sub m, y sub m. The first point is x1, y1. And the second point is x2, y2. So to find the midpoint, I take my values and plug them in. x1 is negative 2, x2 is 8. I divide it by 2. And then y1 is 7, y2 is negative 9, and then divide by 2. Close my parentheses. And negative 2 plus 8 is 6. 7 plus negative 9 is negative 2. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. Negative 2 divided by 2 So for the next group of problems, we'll look at using the midpoint formula. So the directions for number 6 are to find the midpoint of the segment with the given endpoints. So if we look at the graph on the right and label these 2 points, negative 2, 7 will label as point A, and 8, negative 9 will label as point B. So negative 2, 7 means left 2 and up 7. And then 8, negative 9 is right 8, down negative 9, and if I count the number of boxes that are horizontal between the 2 points, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 boxes. And if I count the number of boxes that are vertical, I would count 16 boxes. So I can see by my graph that the midpoint is right around this area here. So to find the exact location of the midpoint from point A, instead of moving over 10 spaces horizontally, I'm only going to move over 5, just half the length. And instead of moving down 16, I'm going to move down 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this point right here are the exact coordinates of the midpoint. And if we were to label this point, we would get the point 3, negative 1. So the midpoint can be found this way by calculating horizontal and vertical distances between points and then dividing them by 2 to find the midpoint. But what happens if you don't have a graph or if the coordinates are too large? So when that happens, that's when you need the midpoint formula. So I'll write it again. It's in the beginning of the lesson. X sub m, y sub m represents the midpoint, and it's equal to x1 plus y1 over 2 x1 plus x2 over 2. You're just adding the x's, dividing by 2, and then add the y's and divide by 2. And then go back up to my points A and B and label them as x1, y1, and then x2, y2. And I substitute them in the formula so that my midpoint is negative 2 plus 8 divided by 2, and then 7 plus negative 9 divided by 2. Negative 2 plus 8 is 6. 7 plus negative 9 is negative 2. And when I simplify, 6 over 2 is 3. Negative 2 over 2 is negative 1. So my midpoint is 3, negative 1. So this point corresponds with the point that we found graphically. So either way would work, and again, if you don't have a graph, then you have to use the formula. So for number 7, we'll do this one without a graph. So negative 3, negative 4 will make x1, y1. 8, 12, x2, y2. And I write the formula. The midpoint, x sub m, y sub m, is equal to the x's added together and then divided by 2, the y's added together and then divided by 2, so that we have negative 3 plus 8 over 2, and negative 4 plus 12 divided by 2. Negative 3 plus 8 is 5. Negative 4 plus 12 is 8. And when we get to simplifying 5 over 2, you could leave it as 5 over 2, but I'll write it as 2.5. And 8 over 2 is 4. So the midpoint is 2.5, 4. So here's where things get a little messy, is when we have fractions. And we have negative 5.5, 6 is our x1, y1. And then negative 3 1/4, 2 3/4, our x2, y2. And I'll write the formula up here this time because I'm going to need a little bit of room for this one. So the midpoint, x sub m, y sub m. I add the x's, divide by 2. and then I add the y's, divide by 2. So first let's start by adding the x's. So if we take negative 5.5 plus negative 3 1/4, we can change these to improper fractions, which would be negative 11/2 plus negative 13/4, and then identifying the least common denominator to be 4. And then I would have to multiply the first fraction by 2 so that the denominator is 4. And this gives me negative 22/4 plus negative 13/4, which is negative 35/4. So negative 35/4 is our x1 plus x2. But then we have to divide it by 2. And when you divide fractions, you have to multiply by the reciprocal. So this is really negative 35/4 times 1/2, which is equal to negative 35/8, and negative 35/8 as a mixed number is negative 4 3/8. So underneath this x sub m, y sub m, the x coordinate of our midpoint is negative 4 3/8. So now we want to find the y coordinate. And we want to find y1 plus y2 first, and then we'll divide by 2. So our y1 is 6, and our y2 is 2 3/4. So this one doesn't have to be as lengthy as the first one, because when we add 6 plus 2 3/4, we get just 8 3/4. So the sum is 8 3/4, but now we have to divide this by 2. And when we divide this by 2, we have to change it to an improper fraction, which is 35/4. And when we divide it by 2/1, we multiply it by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So 35/4 times 1/2 is 35/8. And 35/8 is the same fraction that we had for our x, just positive. 8 divides into 35 4 times, with 3 left over, so it's 4 3/8. So the coordinate of our midpoint is negative 4 3/8, comma, positive 4 3/8. And for the rest of the problems, the directions are that M is the midpoint of AB, and we want to find the coordinates of B. So point A is the point 2, 1. So that's right over here, point A. And point B, or point M, So for the rest of the problems, the directions are that M is the midpoint of segment AB, and we want to find the coordinates of B. So in this one, we're going to start by graphing and find our answer graphically, and then we'll look at using the midpoint formula in case we don't have a graph. So first let's start by graphing A. 2, 1 is right 2, up 1. And then point M is left 3, up 5. So if M is our midpoint between A and B, then B must be somewhere over here. So to find it, we want to find horizontal and vertical distances. And the horizontal distance between A and where it starts to corner is 5, and the vertical distance is 4. So if I move the same two distances, horizontally 5 and vertically 4, I end up here, and that point is -8, 9. So I could see that the endpoint for point B is -8, 9, but now let's look at how to find that point if we didn't have a graph. So I'll start by writing the formula. X sub m, y sub m represents the midpoint, and it's equal to the x's added together and then the y's added together, both divided by 2. And point A is x1, y1. Point M is x sub m, y sub m. So if we start with the x's, x sub m is equal to x1 plus x2 over 2, and then y sub m is equal to y1 plus y2 over 2. So this part is equal to this part, and this is equal to this. So if I plug the numbers in, x sub m is -3, x sub 1 is 2, we're finding x sub 2, and if I put this over 1 and cross multiply, I have 1 times 2 plus x sub 2 and then I multiply this product. -3 times 2 equals -6, and when I distribute the 1, it stays as 2 plus x sub 2, and my last step in finding the x coordinate is to subtract 2 so that I get x sub 2 to equal -8. So now I do the same thing for y. Y sub m is 5, y sub 1 is 1. I'm solving for y sub 2, so I put the 5 over 1 and cross multiply. 1 times 1 plus y sub 2 is this product, and then I take this product distribute the 1. 1 plus y sub 2 equals 10. I subtract 1 from both sides so that I get y sub 2 equals 9. So point B has coordinates of -8, 9. So this was the answer that I was able to get by the graph, but again, if you don't have the graph, then you have to use the formula. So for number 10, negative 6, 0 is the point x1, y1. This time we don't have a graph, so we'll have to use the formula. Point M is the midpoint, so that's our x sub m, y sub m. And if I write the formula, I know that the x's go together and the y's go together. So with that, I know that x sub m equals x sub 1 plus x sub 2 over 2, and I know that y sub m equals y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. And I'm finding point B, which is our x sub 2, y sub 2. This is the point that we don't know. So x sub m is negative 3, x sub 1 is negative 6, we're finding x sub 2, we divide by 2, put the negative 3 over 1, and cross multiply. I distribute the 1, and my last step is to add the 6 to both sides to find that x sub 2 is equal to 0. Now that I've found x sub 2, now I want to find y sub 2, so I start with y sub m is 2.5. So I take 2.5 is equal to y sub 1 is 0 plus y sub 2 is what we're finding divided by 2, and I have 2.5. 2.5 I'll write as an improper fraction, 5 over 2. 0 plus y over 2, you can just write that as y sub 2. And when I cross multiply, I have 2 times y sub 2 equals 10. And my last step in finding y sub 2 is to divide both sides by 2 so that y sub 2 is equal to 5. So that my point B has coordinates of 0, 5. And the last problem, number 11, point A, 2.5, 4, is our x1, y1. Point M, 2, negative 1/2, since it represents the midpoint, is our x sub m, y sub m. And I write the formula. So I'm going to take the x's and put them together, and then the y's and put them together. So that x sub m is equal to x1 plus x2 over 2, and y sub m is equal to y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. Remember that we're finding point B, which is our x sub 2, y sub 2. And our x sub m is positive 2, x sub 1 is 2.5. We're adding this to x sub 2 and dividing by 2. So when I put this 2 over 1 and cross multiply, I have 2.5 plus x sub 2 equals 4. So in this one, I'm going to leave this as a mixed number because I'm just solving for x sub 2, and all I have to do is move the 2.5 over to the other side. And if I take 4 minus 2.5, 4 minus 2.5 is 1.5. So I found my x sub 2 to be 1.5. And if I move back up, y sub m is negative 1/2. Y sub 1 is 4. We're finding y sub 2, and we divide by 2. And now we're ready to cross multiply. 2 times 4 plus y sub 2, and then 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. I distribute the 2. And then subtract 8 from both sides. So 2 times y sub 2 is equal to negative 10. So that y sub 2 is equal to negative 5. So point B is equal to 1.5, negative 5.